Hi, this is Adam Kirschenheiter, the Catholic layman, just taking some time today to explain worship in the Churches of Christ. Alright, so the first thing about the Church of Christ worship, let's look at the building itself. So when you go into a Church of Christ, the most traditional Churches of Christ will be quite austere with not much decoration on the sanctuary walls, no crosses. Usually there's a baptismal, like a jacuzzi tub sometimes, or something else that someone could be fully immersed, but it's often not visible. It'd be behind a wall in the two churches that I'm familiar with. I've been to probably 4, but there's a they might have scriptures. I've seen scriptures on the wall. That is fine. And no decoration. Well, there is decoration of like design, like patterns and stuff like that. There's these metal cutouts this one church puts up because it would look pretty plain up front with nothing. There's going to be usually a table, and it's a table, well, because my point of view is Catholic, it does look somewhat altar-like, and both of the tables in the churches that I've been attending for the past 20 years have "Do this in remembrance of me" carved into the table. So, and when the person speaks before the table, they are facing the people, and I'll get to that in a minute. So you walk into the Church of Christ. There's often a vestibule or like a larger entrance area. One of the entrance areas was so large that they actually had small parties there in the vestibule area, like anniversary parties and stuff of members. So it was a pretty large vestibule, and lots of Southern hospitality. That is one thing that the Churches of Christ does very, very well. They show Southern hospitality, even though I'm in Michigan, so they're in the north. So a lot of people who are watching this video might say, you don't know Churches of Christ till you've been to Tennessee or Texas. But in Michigan, the way I've seen it is lots of hospitality. You can't be someone sneaking in to check it out without getting a very warm greeting from about half of the people there, right? So that's good, I guess. I'm not quite an extrovert, so it's not in my comfort zone. As a Catholic perspective, I go into church and I'm in meditative mode, so I might say hi to my friend the usher and hi to another usher, and then I go to my seat and I get there early. I pray the rosary and stuff like that. So it's more, as soon as I walk in the building, I'm in meditative mode. Sorry, that clicking is my dog's feet on the floor. He's coming to visit us in the video. But, so, after you walk in the vestibule, you will notice there is no organ in the Churches of Christ. Actually, one of the big distinctions of Churches of Christ is there's no instrumentation whatsoever. They don't use any musical instrumentation. The reason they do that is, that's the click of the dog's heels above us in the kitchen. So he's moving around. But they say the Bible is silent on musical instrumentation in the New Testament, so there's no musical instruments. Everything's a cappella. You will see often an opening prayer, sometimes after some hymns, depending on the church you go to, but and then a lot of hymn singing. They have some, the hymns themselves are interesting because there's hymns from various different faiths. There's modern day Christian music songs. There's songs written by non-Church of Christ authors like John Wesley, and some that are from other denominations as well. So you'll see most of the classics in the hymnals that I've seen have some of the classics, Amazing Grace and such. But there's also, the cool thing is they do have multiple part pieces where men and women, alto and bass and all of that stuff, sings apart. And there is no choir. They don't do any type of choirs. So it can sound good. It can also sound not as good depending on the Church of Christ, I suppose. I always tell my wife, I said, I could never be a Church of Christer because I don't sing that well. Because to me, the heart of their service is their singing. They're very proud of their singing. Singing is probably half of the time that you're in there is singing. So singing is, like, to me, the biggest focus. Now, they might disagree, but from a Catholic's point of view, I would say that in my church, I would say the Eucharist or communion is the biggest focus. But they do, and I'll get to that, they do put quite a bit of effort into it. So then you generally, it can go either way. Some Churches of Christ have the communion at the beginning of the service. Some have it at the end of the service. And I've seen both of the churches that I attend try it both ways. So they mix it up occasionally. Now originally the first one I went to was a more conservative Church of Christ, and there were like 6 men would walk up to the front of the church, and the 6 men would stand behind the table. One of them would give a little talk and prayer for the host or the bread, and another one would give a talk and a prayer for the cup, and that was a rotating basis. Everyone who's a member that's a male, all of these positions are male, has to or will be in the rotation if they want to. I guess they could probably say I don't feel comfortable, but and I always say to my wife, that's probably the most dangerous time of your service, because I've heard some really not correct theology spoken during that little talk before communion. And I'm not saying not correct by my standard. I would say not correct by biblical standard and Church of Christ standard. But because so many people come from so many different backgrounds, it's unavoidable. And there's no faith test or no presentation of what you're going to say before you get up there. So it can be, the prayers sometimes get that way as well. But communion, before COVID, the church I had went to both, and the traditional church would have like men come out with the trays and then pass the trays down the aisle. People would stay in their seats for communion, and it's understood that only baptized persons take communion, and that would be their baptism. So that would be an adult full immersion baptism, and often an adult full immersion baptism in the Churches of Christ. But we'll have a whole episode on baptism. And then they do the same with little mini cups. So, and the mini cups have grape juice in them. They say fruit of the vine, and they go with that. It's non-alcoholic there as a principle, and not a hard and fast rule. Like as a principle, they in no way endorse drinking. Many of them are totally against drinking, but you see less and less of that as time goes on. So I see a lot of Church of Christ who mention having a beer. So take that for what you will. So then after communion, let's say communion was at the beginning, then after communion there will be a sermon. The sermon generally lasts from 20 minutes to 45 minutes depending on the preacher, and the sermon is topical. It is not usually, and there's freedom for anyone to do whatever they want. Usually it's about a topic, like God's love, God's forgiveness, or whatever. But occasionally you will have some preachers who are more breaking apart a single reading. And actually, that's what I like. That's actually what I'm accustomed to in the Catholic Church. Even though I wasn't raised Catholic, I was raised Lutheran. They too did it that way. Their sermons were focused on a single or a set of readings. And Churches of Christ, for the most part, don't do that. But I would say about a quarter of the the sermons that I've seen were homilies where they broke apart the readings. Then after the readings, if you have communion at the end, there will be more songs, and then so you probably, and the funny thing about the Churches of Christ, so being a Catholic, oftentimes we sing the first two verses of a song, right? And we sing, there's never a time where you're going to sing like more than 4 hymns in a service, and most of the time you're singing just 2 verses of those 4 hymns, one at the beginning at the entrance, and then 2 at communion, and 1 at the end. But not so with the Churches of Christ. The Churches of Christ, they love hymns. Those hymn boards, those wooden placards in the front that have the hymn numbers. Her last church used those, and I'd sometimes see like 2 hymns on each line. There were so many hymns. I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, this is going to be a long one. So, sorry for those of you who love the singing. Again, not a big singing guy. Then at the end of the service, there is often, and I see it less at the less traditional Church of Christ that my wife goes to now, but at the other one, it was every time there would be a call for prayer or come to the waters of baptism if you haven't been baptized. And I suppose, depending on the elders of that Church of Christ, maybe if you already have been baptized in the Church of Christ, because I know of several people in the Church of Christ who have been baptized more than once in the Church of Christ. So, I don't know. We only, as Catholics, only do it, like once. Even if you're like baptized in the Church of Christ and you become Catholic, you're not baptized again. We recognize what God did in that first baptism, and a second one would be a moot point, right? So we don't do that. We just require that there be water and the Trinitarian formula in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. In Jesus' name, but we say the Son. I baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, which is the formula that the Church of Christ uses most of the time. Although it can, like people are baptizing in rivers, people who are not preachers, not anyone can do a baptism. So if someone comes up and wants their dad to baptize them, they let them do that. Or I guess I've never seen a woman baptize. I don't know whether it's allowed. I kind of doubt it would be, but. So then after that altar call, another hymn or 2 sometimes, and then dismissal. After dismissal, my wife usually closes down the place. I drive separate, in part because I go to another service, but in part because I would be there 40 minutes after service, her talking to people. So at my church, they have another service coming right in, so there is, like 20 minutes to get 1,000 people out and 1,000 more people in. So that's the way it goes. So I hope that gives you a little better idea of the worship at the Churches of Christ. I hope I in no way offended anyone or misrepresented it. There will be theology behind some of these things in subsequent episodes. Their theology of a communion will be an episode, and baptism will be an episode. As far as and actually church polity will be a episode, because I mentioned elders and pastors, and so that they actually don't call them pastors. So I bet you a lot of people who haven't watched to this point are like, he called them pastors. It's actually ministers, and to call a pastor would be like an offense to many Churches of Christers. So the pastor, I guess, would be an elder, would be an equivalent of a pastor, because there's a whole language thing. But when I get to church polity, I'll explain it more. So if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the comments. If I have misrepresented in any way, please feel free to write that in the comments as well. This is not meant to be a totally exhaustive treatment of the Church of Christ, but just a Catholic perspective on what you would see when you go to a Church of Christ service. Thank you.